recording. Sorry about that. Okay, so this session is being recorded because very often we find many of our colleagues can't join us during the live session, but they do view the recording later on, and then we have discussions later on following that as well. So today, this is the second webinar from this year, and we do tend to have webinars once in every 6 weeks. And I would like to invite you all, if you think there's a topic that you would like to be discussed that's relevant to business education and technology enhanced learning, please do let any one of us know. So on the steering committee of business education SIG, we have myself, Harsh Suri, Audrey Warner from University of Auckland, Danielle Logan, and she's still here. I'm glad she can join us today. Amanda White, Sandy Barker, and Brent Gregory. So please shoot an email to any one of us if you have any suggestions about further webinars this year. And please do join our MS Teams site as well. I think all of you should have access to MS Teams site, but if you don't, please do let me know and I'll add you on to this. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our presenters today from University of Sydney, Associate Professor Peter Bryant, Associate Professor Elaine Huber, Dr. Stephanie Wilson, Dr. Diva Vardak, and Dr. Jessica Tyrrell. In this webinar, our terrific presenters will discuss connected learning at scale. It's a 5-year large-scale collaborative strategically funded project between educational developers, learning designers, students, alumni, and academic teaching partners. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to our presenters today.
Thank you very much, Harsh, for that nice introduction. I can't, still trying to work out how to see everybody, but I don't think I can.
You can't because Craig's sharing the slides.
Sharing. That's okay. Well, I hope Peter is here. So we are a big team. Peter, you're something with your camera. I'm only seeing a yellow square, but anyway, right. I might pass over to Peter to get started.
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Excellent. Hello, my name is Associate Professor Peter Bryant. I'm the Associate Dean of Education at the University of Sydney Business School. And what we want to share with you is a large-scale transformation project that we've been running at the business school since 2018. And at the core of this project is a particularly critical challenge for business schools. And that is the notion of how we manage and deal with scale. At the business school at Sydney, we have increased our student numbers somewhere in the vicinity of 46% since 2014, and now currently have 16,500 students, about 10,500 FTE in the business school in 2 major programs. That means our units that we teach in those programs are massive. The largest unit we run sits in that sort of 2,500 student mark every semester, and the sort of average size of our units can vary between about 1,000 and 1,500 students. And what has happened as those units have grown in size is that we've had to try and manage scale, cope with scale. And our units, like putting water into a balloon, have had to expand to try and manage the increase in size. And the way we've done that has generally been in 2 different ways. We've either magnified, which means that we just put more people in a room and we make it easier to see the same content with a bigger audience, or we have multiplied, where we've taken a particular class size and a particular structure of learning and just ran it multiple times. That might be 120 students where we run it 46 times in a semester with the same content, the same activities, the same assessment. All of those together struggle to create a coherent student experience. So CLaS for us, or the Connected Learning at Scale project, was a way to redesign, not to cope with scale, but to make scale a native consideration in the design of curriculum, teaching, learning, and assessment. For us, it is about a complex ecosystem of change. This isn't a top-down, bottom-up model. This is where we are looking to fundamentally transform the way in which we structure curriculum, the way in which we engage in teaching, learning, and assessment, the spaces in which our assessment our learning occurs, the experiences our students have, and the community that they are a part of. We build at the center of this three things, one of which is the idea that through connection, students learn. Whether it's about the social construction of knowledge, whether it's about the social experience they have, students learn through connection. We also build into this the idea that students are going to gain knowledge through and create their own knowledge through the learning that we construct. And then finally, we build on the idea that this connection, this network that they have, is not simply about student to student or student to teacher. It's about the networks that they have and they bring to their learning, the experiences and knowledges they bring to their learning from inside and outside the institution. It's about the way they connect and engage with their discipline. It's the way they connect and engage with the university community. So connected learning at scale is built on three principles. It's built on the principle of information engagement. This is transforming didactic learning and the sort of interpretation and broadcast of content so that students actually engage actively with the critical skills, knowledge, and experience they need in order to understand and scaffold understanding inside their unit. The second principle is about connected learning and connected participation and active learning. And this is very much about how we transform what would be referred to as the tutorial or workshop experience, and how we move that from being, once again, quite didactic. Here's a thing that we want to discuss in a chapter. Did you read question 6? What's your opinion on this? To actually constructing an experience that's both active and connected. And then shifting assessment away from memory-based assessments, away from repetition of content, towards being relevant to the students and authentic, both in terms of the assessment itself and in terms of the feed forward that we give to those students. All of those principles shape the way we design curriculum, the way we are engaging and training staff, the way we set student expectations through both our sort of preempting that in terms of unit study outlines, but also through the way in which we engage in teaching and learning. But we also locate this not in the abstract. Connection by itself as an abstract really struggles to provide relevance to students. So we locate this in the concept of critical global local challenges, how students are going to use the knowledge and skills they have in order to be leaders for good. We also involve our students deeply in the principles and practices of co-design. This is not a top-down, we design this for our students. We embed not just the kind of quantitative knowledge that we usually get from things like student satisfaction surveys. We bring in qualitative knowledge. We engage students in projects like Work, Live, Play, Learn, which is a digital storytelling project where they explain to us how their lives and experiences are shaped by their learning. Future Makers, which is a project where students collaboratively come together to solve and address critical global local challenges. We've got a variety of different methods by which we involve our students as partners in this learning. And the final component of the Connected Learning at Scale project, next slide, thank you, Craig, is the fact that it is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And you'll see this through the presentations of my colleagues as they show you what we do. We are redesigning teaching and learning to deliver an effective hybrid ecosystem. We look at the disciplines, we look at the skills of the teachers, we look at the expectations of the students, we look at the nature of the unit, we look at how that unit sits within inside a program, inside a discipline structure. We look at how that unit sits within spaces, how it's taught, how it's delivered. And we are redesigning the learning experience within that kind of very nuanced ecosystem of experience to not be bound by the kind of limited, rusted on timetabling, the way a room is structured. Oh, this has to be in a lecture theatre, therefore it can only be a lecture, but to actually make our learning space agnostic in a way that we can say to students and staff that what they're doing in that class is not bound by space, not bound by structure. It doesn't mean there isn't space and there isn't structure, but those things are part of the consideration of how we design the learning and teaching approach. So I'll finish my section there and I will hand back to Elaine.
Thanks, Peter. Craig, just the next slide, thanks. All right, so I know Peter gave a little bit of background at the beginning about the Sydney Business School, University of Sydney, but just a little bit more detail, I guess. We do have 10 disciplines in the business school, and next, Craig. And we've got around 500 staff, split between the professional and the academic teaching staff. And then next, Craig, the student size, so it is a very large business school. We are heavy on the postgraduate, as Peter mentioned, and we do have a large international cohort. Next slide. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about our team and some of the processes that we've been in this project, and then I'll pass over to some of the team members to talk about some of the innovations they've been implementing. So we do have a big team. So this is a strategically funded project. We're multidisciplinary and we're called the Business Co-Design Team. We've got media, we've got learning designers, we have educational developers who are academic positions, we have a few evaluation staff, and we have a learning technologist to help us implement some new technologies. And of course, then we work with our students, as Peter has mentioned, with our unit coordinators, but also we try and incorporate our alumni through industry practitioners. Next slide. Thanks, Craig. Just very quickly, so the scale of the project, we started in the second half of 2019 and we're running to 2024, middle of 2024. And obviously we got hit by COVID in 2020 and we had to pivot the project a little bit. And we had this terminology of deep touch and light touch units. So our original project was to look at just the core units that we teach in the business school, the really, really large units, are over 1,000, 2,000 students sometimes. But then we started to say, well, what are we learning through these that we could do some sort of further educational development work on a lighter touch. So this is just the number of units that we've been working with so far. Okay, and then and each of those units go through a cycle, which I'll explain. So just quickly our process. So we start with this thing that we call connect in. So as Peter's mentioned, we're all about trying to build connection. So we bring this co-design sort of partnership, and we start off with this sort of session where we bring academics, alumni, students, educational designers, learning designers together to really imagine that sort of blue sky thinking. And then, as most of you will be familiar with, we would then pull back from that and scope some realistic changes that we could make in the units. We always have an evaluation plan, and then we go through this cycle. Next slide, Craig. And in our cycle, you'll be familiar with, many of you will be familiar with the words on the slide, this terminology. So it's a mix of educational design research and as well as design thinking approaches. And we go through these sort of 5 stages in each cycle. Each cycle is, so we do 3 cycles with a unit, that's our deep touch. And each cycle is a semester. So we work with these units across 3 semesters. So for a year and a half, and we really try. So quite often the first cycle might just be to that ideation, that connect in, the planning and the building. The second cycle would be the implementation and then the evaluation, and then we would make further changes and do another cycle, third cycle. Next slide, thanks, Craig. Obviously, we have been trying to push the boundaries with technologies in this project. looking at how we can use technologies at scale. I've just listed some of the tools that we've trialed. We use Canvas as a learning management system here, but we've tried to push it, bend it, try and break it a little bit, add plugins, see what we can do to leverage the technology. And Teams has been a big part of what we've tried to do. The next slide. This is just a kind of an image just to show you that whilst we're trying to, well, we've got this CLaS project, there's plenty of innovation going on around the school already, but we're trying to build on that and see what's working and what can be applied in large classes, and then to share that in a much wider way, which I'll talk to you about at the end. Next slide. So we do have ethics approval to collect data because we want these changes to be evidence-based. So across our units, we have approval for student surveys and student focus groups, also staff interviews, staff. So the unit coordinators that we work with, we're trying to get feedback from them on our processes. We do tutor focus groups to see from their point of view how things have gone. Next, and then we've also got approval to look at learning analytics. I'm sure you're all familiar. We could have a whole presentation on learning analytics. We're still trying to struggle with, at scale, what do we do with this huge amount of data and how can we make sense of it and make it useful? And we've got approval also for class observations. And this is not about what the teacher is doing necessarily in the class, but more about the space, and where Peter mentioned earlier about using space in different ways, and so observing the way different parts of the room can be used for different activities. Next slide. And we've also, we have our standard, what we call unit of study survey. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, you know, your student feedback survey at the end of a unit. We've got this standard question set that we ask in every unit. So we've been plotting our USS data, and we're seeing some upward trends, even though we've been through the pandemic and the workload, the original project plan has increased. We're still seeing great cycle-on-cycle results, which is great. And I think that might be it. Yeah, so I'm now going to pass over to Diwa, who's going to talk. So our team members are going to talk about each of the 3 principles and give you some examples. Thanks, Diwa.
Thanks, Elaine. You can hear me? Yep, great.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm one of the educational developers with the BCD team, and I work mostly with deep touch units, as Elaine mentioned earlier. So I would like to give 2 examples of 2 deep touch units that I worked with. One is an undergraduate and one is a postgraduate unit. So first of all, this is an undergraduate unit, and I would like to focus on principle 1. So this is information engagement. How does it look like in different units and in different contexts? So the context for this unit is that it's a first-year core unit in the accounting discipline. There are usually around more than 1,300 students each semester enrolled. Most of the students just come straight from school, so this is they are very new to the university experience. And so before we actually started with this working with this unit, the unit you could see on the left bottom of the screen, the canvas was pretty much used for sharing the lecture notes with the students and also recording of the lectures themselves. So there was a huge 1.5 hour lecture recorded, and the students are watching this lecture on their own, and there were some activity sheets where they would work on their own to you know, kind of like, you know, learn along the lecture. So when we started for this unit, I got together with the unit coordinator, our learning designer, and at times we involved, of course, our media a person as well dedicated to the team. And so we spoke about what does the unit actually need, what are the needs of the students, and how can we actually replicate the best possible way of teaching these students in an online environment, because this was the time when we were all fully studying, the students were studying online for the semester. So we started work on this unit in 2020, and in 2021 we presented to students a brand new unit, completely redesigned. So our focus was kind of moving from this didactic approach to more interactive, to reduce the passive consumption of content, and to scaffold students in their learning, because they needed a little bit more hand-holding since they were first-year students. And so how did we do it? First of all, we completely redesigned the canvas. We implemented a number of strategies to increase engagement. So one of them was, rather than having a 1.5-hour recorded lecture, we recorded small videos of core content. So these were the content that the students perhaps needed to know, our threshold concepts and things like that. So they were actually like recorded in smaller videos. So the students could actually go back and watch this video again if they needed to. And then we used H5P on Canvas to present to them a few questions about what they just watched in the video. So the students were able to kind of test their own understanding. Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? So these were not accessible, obviously. They were just activities on Canvas, but the students actually found it very useful to see whether they got the concepts from the video, or did they need to rewatch the video or do the reading again. And the Canvas modules were in a multimodal format, so they might have included videos, text, diagrams, interactive Genially diagrams, where the students could explore some of the topics and details. So one of the things we also did, we recorded a number of pencast videos, and you could see this on the top right corner of your screen, where the lecturer would just explain in plain language some of the concepts that students might have found difficult at beginning. These concepts were, of course, included in the book, but the students might have actually had some issue with understanding the complexity of the language. So it was very helpful for the students to hear the lecturer and see as the lecturer, as she was writing and explaining the concepts for the students. So can we move to the next slide, please, Craig? Thanks. So one of the things that surprised us in this unit was that when we presented this unit for the first time in 2021, semester 1, to the students, there were around a large number, over 400 students that were repeat students for various reasons. So when they came to this new semester, they saw the unit completely changed, redesigned. They were a bit shocked. So the unit coordinator received quite a few emails about, in the first couple of weeks, for students who thought that they would just cruise through the subject, and they would just not do much work because they've already done it. And when they saw the redesign unit, they were really shocked. But interestingly, in week 4, we did a survey to see how the students were going, and almost the majority of the students loved it. Also did focus groups later on in week 8. And so in the survey, for example, I wanted to share one of the comments from students who did the unit in the previous year, and they said that this is nothing to do with this semester, and I'm really enjoying it, and the modules are so much better, and they're much better than 2 hours huge videos to watch. And of course, they are saying 150 times better the way it's been designed. And students really found the shorter videos more motivating, because they could watch and rewatch again and again if they had issues with learning some of the concepts. And they also liked the check your own understanding checkpoints to see they were going okay. And the way the content was organized in modules, they really enjoyed that. So this was a really good success story for us in terms of this implementation of Principle 1. So can we move to the next slide, Craig, please? Thank you. So another example I would like to show you is a postgraduate unit. Again, with how Principle 1 was implemented in this unit. So this is a unit from the Master of Commerce degree, and the unit is Creative and Analytic Mindset. So we are teaching students about how creativity and analytics can come together in a business environment. This was a large unit, and we designed it actually from scratch. So this is a completely new unit we started working on in 2021, in 2020 and 2021. So when we presented in 2021, the first time the unit to the students, there were over 2,000 students in this unit. It was a large unit, And of course, being different students, they are not first year. We kind of concentrated on a little bit of a different aspect. So we wanted to give students a bit more agency. We wanted to provide kind of like a guided interaction, and also we wanted them to connect with their peers through the content. And I'll show an example later on in the next slide. So what does it mean? So for example, with the content, we divided the content into what is important. You have to do this, you have to engage with this, and anything that was extra, we clearly marked it so that the students knew what was expected of them, and if they wanted to challenge themselves, they could go a bit extra mile. With the same we did with the readings for each week. So you could see the example on the top right. It's kind of like organized in an accordion where the students could click and reveal the readings. They were like core readings that they had to do each week. They were recommended readings if they wanted to challenge themselves a little bit, or optional readings if they really wanted to go deeper into that concept of the week. We also provided kind of like brief short scenarios for the students to engage with and make them think a bit more about the concepts. And then at the end of each week, they were reflecting on their learning. At the end of each week, we had a few questions to trigger their mind, like what did you learn and how would you actually see that implemented in real life environment. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thanks. Thank you. So when I said we wanted opportunity for students to connect through the content with the other students, so we used, for example, Padlet. This was a really good tool because students told us that it was good to see while they were going through the lecture material what the other students were actually thinking about the material. So on the Padlet was they would anonymously post and respond to a question. Another feature of this unit that we implemented was we invited lots of guest lecturers. Now these guest lecturers were most of the time from industry, from outside academia, and they were providing practical examples of how creativity and analytics come together in their work environment and what does it look like. We had people from Kohl's, Woolworths, and we even had musicians who came and literally played their musical instrument and then talked about how creativity and analytics come together in that environment for them. So the students appreciated all these kind of different aspects. When we collected the USS data, so just two of them features that I wanted to show you, the structure of the unit and the quality of learning experience, and overall the experience of the students in this unit was quite good, which was very encouraging. And I'll stop there and now hand over to Steph, who is going to talk about Principle 2 and some examples. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Diwa. Yeah, so my name's Stephanie. I'm an educational developer like Diwa with the business co-design team. And yeah, I'm going to be talking about Principle 2. So just to refresh your memory, Principle 2 was about connected participation and active learning. So Diwa was talking a little bit more sort of about the digital space, the online space with information engagement. But we've also given quite a lot of thought to sort of the student experience in the workshop or tutorial space. And quite often the precursor to them coming into a workshop is their sort of pre-work or their online module work. So the first example I'm going to provide is from a Foundations of Marketing unit. It's a first year postgraduate unit. We had about 700 students in this unit, 95% of which were international students. And this was a unit where we did move from a sort of a 3-hour lecture to a very different model of having 1.5-hour online, very interactive online modules and 1.5-hour workshops. So we really needed to give some thought to what we wanted to do in this workshop space. So in the bottom left corner there, you can see a classroom. This was a pilot space that we designed in our Abercrombie building in the business school, where we were sort of testing out a sort of a larger workshop format with lots of students. So I think this particular room housed 60 at this time. So we'd already started to experiment in this unit with the sort of large workshop format. When we started development on this unit, we moved to a larger space and experimented in this unit with having several educators in the room and again, more students. So we had a 75 student tutorial or workshop with 3 educators in the room, and we had concurrent spaces. So we had 2 adjoining classrooms that looked similar to the ones you see there in the top right-hand corner. And that also meant that because those classes were running at the same time, we actually had 75 in one and up to 75 in the neighbouring room. So we were actually able to share some collaborative tools across those spaces as well, so that the students in the rooms not only got the benefit of hearing the outputs of group work and things from their own tutorial groups, but also from the neighbouring room. So we started to sort of think about how to formalise the sort of structure of the large workshop as well. So you can see in the bottom right there, there's 4 kind of stages. So often the workshops would start with what we would call sort of a launch pad, and that might start with a mini lecture or a demo or some kind of activity that required a shared focus of attention amongst the whole room. So that would be sort of like 3 separate tutorial groups all coming together for an introduction of some kind. And then they divide into the 3 tutorial groups, each with their own tutor to facilitate their learning. And then, of course, within those tutorial activities, they would then further divide into their more focused smaller groups, so 5 or 6 students. And then at the end of the session, they would return to the whole group sort of setting with everyone, with that shared focus for the final debrief or wrap up. We'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Craig. So we continued thinking about this large workshop format, and we put a bit of energy in this because I think, as Peter alluded to earlier, we're not just thinking about the sorts of tasks that we want to design for students, although that's obviously central and very important, but we also really wanted to think about the social configuration that students were in, or the social dimension, and also the set design and how all of those things come together. So we were really interested in sort of how the physical space could support the sorts of learning activity that we value, that Peter sort of mentioned in his introduction. So in this space that you can see here, it's another space that we've been piloting at times when we've been able with COVID. And you can see actually here the floor is tiered, so we actually started to sort of build this structure into the physical space. So you can see at the front of the room, in the left-hand image, there's actually space for 60 students to gather all at once. And then that same 60 students can then move to a sort of a group setting in the middle of the room. And then at the back of the room, we had sort of sketching, writing, brainstorming kind of space set up where we had whiteboards and standing tables. So different sorts of activity that can happen in different parts of the room without having to constantly reconfigure the space. So we've sort of run quite a lot of observations in this space, both in this unit, the marketing unit, and also other units as well. In the marketing unit, one of the bits of feedback that we got from students was also around the benefits of having more than one teacher in the room. So while the large workshop format increased the number of students in tutorials, having the presence of several teachers and also being able to sort of break down into these different group configurations, students actually found that they still experienced an active learning environment, and yeah, they really enjoyed having the dynamics of the different educators in the room. We'll move to another example now. Thanks, Craig. So this is a little bit of a contrasting example. Again, we're talking about connected learning, connected participation and active learning. So there are so many different ways we can approach this. In this quantitative business analysis unit, which is a first-year core unit with up to 1,100 students in it. So again, we're dealing with quite large numbers here. We also, in semester 2 2020, moved from sort of a traditional lecture tutorial format to a new model, which was self-paced online modules. So we created 12 different online modules across the 12 weeks of the program. And then again, had to really think about what we then did in the workshop space. Traditionally in this unit, the lecture material really covered the various statistical methods covered in the unit, and then the students would go through a series of questions in the tutorials, which tended to sort of be textbook examples, sort of fairly ad hoc sort of data sets and things that they would look into to apply their learning. But we wanted to try and make the workshop questions more authentic and more relevant for students, and try and get a bit of consistency in there so that they could revisit the same data set, for example. So given that it's very difficult to source data sets that can accommodate all the different types of learning that they needed to do in the unit, we wanted to trial a student-generated data set. So students actually completed a survey on plastics usage and production in week 1 of the unit, and we had about 700, just over 700 students responded to that survey. So we'd all of a sudden we'd created our own data set, and then the student-generated data was used in the workshops across many weeks to allow a more investigative approach to the unit for the students. So it was quite a different model. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you, Craig. Okay, so we also knew from the literature that this more kind of investigative approach to the learning of statistics in this context was probably going to support student learning better. And in our Connecting workshop right at the beginning, students and our industry partners and everyone else involved really supported this idea as well. The evaluation that we ran did suggest that students really were quite motivated and engaged given this new way of doing things. They really liked the fact that they were able to work with a data set where they got to sort of organise the data, clean the data, and go through that whole process, which they felt was a bit more authentic. They also really liked that it was a student-generated data set, so they can relate to the data. It's actually their cohort, it's real people, real-life communities that we're a part of, and specifically relevant to their cohort. So there really was this sense that that the data set, which was this shared resource, actually led to some sort of connection and a sense of being connected with other students, creating a shared data resource that facilitated their learning and connection. So we were sort of starting to discover lots of different ways of giving students that sense of connection with others. That's all from my examples. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jess now to talk about Principle 3 and assessment.
Thanks so much, Steph. Hi, everyone. My name's Jess Tyrrell. I'm an educational developer in the business co-design team, so same as Stephanie and Dewa. And I'm going to talk about 2 examples of work that our team has done to support CLaS Principle 3. Principle 3 is around relevant and authentic assessment and feed forward. And so our challenge is doing these things well at scale. So the first example that's up on the screen there is one of our large units, a large foundation unit in the business analytics discipline. So it's a unit to introduce students to statistical and other quantitative methods for business. And it's actually the postgrad sister unit to the Buzz 1020 that Steph just spoke about. So some of the issues from that unit also apply here. So we know that large, really big classes and you know, the first semester we worked on this unit had 1,600 students. And we know these large classes pose challenges for authentic assessment. So there had previously been an authentic type of assessment back when the unit was a lot smaller, but these had been removed before the CLaS project because the cohort sizes were just growing really quickly in these units, and there was a perception from the coordinators that authentic activities, things like group work, are just too hard to do when you're talking about a unit of that scale. So prior to CLaS commencing, they'd really been running mainly assessments that were either quizzes or exams. So no authentic assessment in the unit. And when our team started working with them, we held a co-design workshop with students and teachers. And one of the themes that emerged from this was that while students felt like they were learning the content and they were learning statistics, they weren't learning statistical thinking. So they weren't getting that investigative kind of reasoned applied side of things. So they really wanted more opportunities to apply the theory that they were learning and the concepts and the methods into real business contexts. So as part of the CLaS project, we co-designed a new authentic data project that had an individual component that fed forward into a group of component. And the assessment was authentic because it required students to select and work with real data sets that they chose themselves. and basically undertake the same kinds of tasks that they would be doing if they were working as business analysts working in industry. So, for example, they produced a data visualization presentation. So doing this at scale in such a large unit, we really had to leverage Canvas. So we used Canvas really thoroughly to facilitate the group formation and group work, the peer review, and we also built quite detailed rubrics, and we had them online via Canvas so that students would get that extra feedback from their rubric on Canvas. And the peer review part was really important, partly because it gave students an extra opportunity to connect with each other because they were studying online. It was during the first lockdown that we started this assessment, but it was also part of the feed forward design, because basically the students could take the peer feedback they received from the first part of their assessment, as well as their tutor feedback, and then directly apply that to the second part of the assignment, where they came together and started to work in groups. So if we could just go to the next slide, please, Craig. So just to share some of the evaluation findings, and you can see there's some examples of screenshots of student data visualizations on the right there. So we evaluated this new assessment design using surveys and focus groups across a number of semesters, and we received really positive feedback from students. So I've put a few comments from the focus group and surveys up there. But a theme that came through those comments was that students really appreciated assessment tasks where they could basically put the same skills that were required to succeed in that assessment into practice at work, and that made it more meaningful for them, especially because they're postgraduate students, so a lot of them were working in the industry or very close to about to start working in the industry. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Craig. So the second and final example I wanted to share with you is a bit of a contrasting example as well in terms of the context. So a very qualitative unit, a postgrad marketing unit on consumer behavior. So this unit had a traditional closed book exam as their most weighted assessment item that was at the end of semester, and students basically wrote an essay in a fixed time period. So as part of the class development, we replaced this traditional closed book exam with a changing consumer behavior challenge. So this assessment design was based on some educational research from Gravois and colleagues. And it's a task that basically required students to set themselves a personal challenge that related to their own consumer behavior. And they submitted that at the beginning of the semester and committed to a challenge. And then they blogged about their progress over the semester, reflecting on their experiences in relation to theory that they were learning from the unit. And so along with that, there was also a participation marked in the unit before the class project. And we know participation marks can be a little problematic. They're not always the most equitable assessment type. So we reshaped the participation mark into an online portfolio called a lookbook. And again, a lookbook, it's a very visual format, the type of format students could expect to encounter working as marketers in their career. So that's what kind of makes it an authentic assessment. And in their lookbook, students curated examples each week that related to the weekly topics they were learning. So you can see on the right there, there's a few pictures from a discussion forum. So in the one on the right, students grabbed a photo of just an advert they've seen in their day-to-day life and then reflected on that based on, sorry, I just saw Colin's message coming up about what platform was used for the lookbook. So they could make the lookbook on any platform they wanted, but then they had to share examples of it just on the Canvas discussion board. And part of their mark was for engaging in discussion and giving some feedback with each other's examples. So yeah, so it was about engaging with what's going on in their life and then writing some reflections of how that related to theory they were learning. And yeah, so part of their mark, like I said, was for discussion as well. So Craig, just the final slide, just to give a bit of feedback on that. Again, we got really great feedback from our evaluation with students, again, through focus groups and surveys. They were very, very positive. They found the tasks creative, enjoyable, engaging, and they kind of emphasized how they fit into and connected with their daily life. So the comment there, a very holistic learning experience that I truly enjoy. So that was really rewarding feedback. So I'll pass back to Elaine now, I believe, and wrap up that example of Principle 3.
Thanks, Jess. All right, so just to finish off, I'll just talk very briefly about kind of how we're planning to share what we've been learning. So as Peter's mentioned, we've worked with a lot of units now, and we learn lots of different things through lots of different disciplines and different sizes. So some of our large units are over 2,000 students, and some are around sort of 400, and it's still a large unit. Anyway, so you've probably heard of design patterns. There's lots of work. Peter Goodyear has led work previously in this area. And what we're doing is trying to build on this idea of creating patterns or blueprints or not so much templates, but ways in which other people can take what we've learned and apply it in their own contexts. So we started off by trying to synthesize what were some of these big problems that we have at scale. Next slide, Craig. And then we developed a set of what we called pattern candidates. Next. And started just thinking about what are some of the issues, summarizing them, what are the units that where have we seen these candidates taking place in the units we've worked with. Next. And then we came up with, so the whole team's worked on this as a sort of sub-project almost. And there's been some really good work on developing pattern templates out of KO University. And so we took the work that they've done, and we started to think, well, what information would we need to give to you as a user so that you could then pick up the really pertinent bits of information? Because as you've seen, we could share and talk a lot about what we've been doing and finding, but how is this going to be passed on to the next group? And the last one, Craig, next. So in terms of developing this sort of pattern language, we're starting to build a website that will share our patterns with the broader community. So we'll put that URL up in the chat. And I think next slide is the last slide. We are open to questions. Peter shared there are a number of blog posts that he's been writing, particularly about the sort of underpinning to his thinking around this project. As I said, we've got this CLaS design patterns starting to be produced, and we'd love to, connect with anyone else who's thinking of or have got similar kind of issues or have been trialing different things. We'd love to hear from you as well. Okay, I guess that's it from us. Over to Harsh, if you want to check any questions.
Thank you so much. It's been so engaging and lovely to hear. I mean, the scale of what you've achieved is just remarkable, especially drawing upon everyone's expertise. Are there any questions? I think everyone can unmute themselves, or...
So there's a question there from Peter. How do you go about getting buy-in from teaching staff? So this is, I can see smiles on the team's faces. So this is one of the questions I asked when I first started, when I was hired on the project. How are we going to get people to buy in? Like we mentioned earlier, we do work with people over 3 cycles. So we do, sometimes people jump in feet first and are really keen to get going. Other times it takes a little bit longer to build that trust and to make small changes and build them into bigger changes. We are lucky in a way that because we are a strategic project, we have funding, and so we are able to give financial support to do buyout of teaching or to do marking buyout so that the academics have a little bit more time to work with us. Any other tips or tricks from the team of how you get people on side?
I think one of the most important parts of this is that when we build a kind of ecosystem like this, the idea is that we really want a situation where our staff feel that they are not just changing for themselves and their students, but are demonstrable examples for their colleagues. So we've built a system of training, support, reward and recognition where the staff who are engaged in this and they see the success, they see the student satisfaction improve, they see student outcomes improve, are celebrated. Whether we put them on in videos as academic rock stars, whether we give their feedback and their FAQs and their resources and share those with faculty, it is that celebration of success that is at the core of this. Because if it's I'm transforming and I just go back into my unit, you kind of get into a kind of cycle of change. What we really want these staff to be exemplars of change, be exemplars of what we're trying to do. And that's been highly successful. You can look up some of those examples on YouTube, and I'll try and find an example and put it in the chat.
Thanks, Peter. Penny, can you ask your question now?
Harsh, I was going to ask the question that Peter's exactly answered. So thank you. I was going to ask about recognition and visibility. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, team.
Yeah, thanks, Penny.
Any further questions?
There's one from
About
Colin.
evaluations. What kind of, I think Will's also asked a question, Elaine. What kind of evaluation do you do for each iteration to improve upon the learning design?
Sorry, where's the question? What evaluation do we do?
What kind of evaluations do you do for each iteration to improve upon the learning design?
So, yeah, so we collect data through a whole range of methods. Through we talk to students through surveys, focus groups. We also get the teacher buy-in. And so those connect-in workshops, we try and also run them. So we gather all of that data, we talk with the unit coordinators, and then we try and, we build in the iterations, and we'll do another connect-in workshop where we get the people to come in and look at what we've found and, reiterate for the next cycle. So is that the question they're asking?
I'll just add to that, Elaine. The other thing we try and do is that because we treat every unit differently, we have some units right at the far end of experimentation doing the really cutting edge kind of stuff that, granted, are in the units that I run. So it means it's a lot easier to convince me to be involved in doing that kind of really cutting edge stuff. But the idea is each of those then gets fed into the kind of design patterns that Elaine was talking about, the kind of iterative design that my colleagues were describing. And through the filter of the individual units and the capabilities and skills of the individual academics, and the way in which we design around their unit, that iterative process happens. It happens through not necessarily just each iteration in the unit, but as it moves from different units and different contexts as well. So it is quite we use the term ecosystem here, and we use ecosystem really deliberately because ecosystems grow and ecosystems change. This isn't a change process. This is a system of change that we hope will continue well past the duration of the project.
There was a question there about how many cycles, how many offerings of the course would this encompass? So each cycle is one semester, so one offering, and then we try and work. So often the first semester ideally would just be a development semester. So we might be, so it depends whether it's a new unit or whether we're redesigning a unit. So it could go across 3. Sometimes we're designing, building, testing, implementing all in the same semester. So as Peter said, we really work with the coordinators and their unit and their context and what works for them in their cycle, because often what we find, another thing that we struggle with these large units, they're not always taught by the same person every semester because they're so big, you know, they get a break, they get a semester off from teaching these big units. So we have to, you know, we might work with someone, but we try and, if it's going to be someone different in the next semester, we bring them into the conversations within that design and development cycle so that they're ready to take it on board. And then the previous person comes back in the third cycle. So again, it is really dependent on the unit and the people involved. Is there another question there?
There's a question from Peter. Have you transferred ideas from this to your smaller units? If so, what did you take over?
Yeah, I don't know, Steph or Dia or Jess, do you want to answer that? I mean, the light touch units, I guess, is our light touch approach. We've been trying to pick up pieces that we've learned and bring them in. The template, I guess, would be one of those things. Dia, you've run some of the light touch.
Yes, I worked with the marketing discipline on 8 light touch units, and what we did was we picked a few features depending on what the unit was, you know, what they needed. But template was one of them. A welcome video was another, so that at the beginning the unit coordinator and the teaching team would record a video to let the students know what this unit is about and kind of welcome them to the unit and create a good kind of rapport with the student at the start. And we did then looked at each unit and to look at like what they need specifically. And some of them, for example, we did implement some H5P interactives for the Canvas sites if they needed students to interact with a model, for example. So yes, it depended on each unit's need, but there was that blanket offering of Canvas template and welcome video and those features.
Thank you so much. Please, everyone, join me in thanking our terrific presenters today. We've learned so much from it and the real stuff that happens on the ground. And I also want to thank all the participants. We had 46 colleagues join us today, which is quite a good turnover. And as we can see from the chat, the chats just kept going on. Thank you so much once again. We'll be having our next webinar in about 6 weeks' time. Please stay tuned through the MS Teams site and through the Ask a Light newsletter. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, Harsh. Bye.
Thanks, Elaine. Truly, and team, Peter, Diva, Penny, and Craig. Really appreciate this.